Okay, hello YouTube. Today I'm going to give you my take on how Magnus Carlsen lost to Hans Niemann, and if you stay tuned to the end of the video, I'm going to give you my theory on how I think that possibly Hans Niemann's previous cheating might have played a role in his victory in this particular game, and I'm going to give you my theory on why I think Magnus Carlsen withdrew from the tournament. And again, these are just theories, but if you want to stay to the end, I'm going to give you my theory on what those two things are. So if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. So the game starts out with Magnus Carlsen playing pawn to d4. We have pawn to d4, knight f6, and then we go into a Nimzo Indian, and then Carlsen turns this into a Catalan. So we have g3, castles, bishop g2, d5. It turns into a basic Catalan position. And then Carlsen starts playing this Catalan a little strange. Like a3 is not a normal way to play the Catalan. Forcing this exchange on c3. And then, of course, black just needs to capture on c4. So like a3 takes, so now white has the bishop pair. And now black doesn't really have much of a choice. He has to kind of capture on c4. Otherwise, he just doesn't have enough for the position, but also this is just kind of a normal capture within the Catalan. Usually this is how black gets his compensation for white's, super long diagonal, as he takes on c4 at some point and either tries to hold on to this pawn or just makes it really difficult for white to get this pawn back. And usually this is supposed to equal out for kind of the long-term pressure that white has along the long diagonal, along with maybe pressure that he might build up on the b file. So we have this dc4, pretty standard. Knight f3, and then we have this move c5. Again, c5 is pretty normal here. You have to kind of strike back in the middle of the board. I mean, in this type of position, what else are you going to do? But we're already kind of playing a structure in a position that's kind of rare, because again, like a3, the forcing move a3 from white, forcing, takes, this is not 100% normal. Like already this position is probably just equal. There's probably nothing much here for white to write home about. Black should be able to equalize pretty quickly by playing c5 and just, playing chess from there. So now after castle's kingside, Hans plays a completely new move in this position. As far as I know, he's the only one to have played it in serious competition. He plays the move c captures d4. So this is something that strikes me as somehow Hans was looking at this position before the game. Somehow he predicted that this was maybe a possibility that Magnus Carlsen might play it. Magnus has played a3 and bc3 in similar positions in the past, but he's never played it in this exact position. So it's not totally unbelievable that he could have done this. And also some of Carlsen's seconds have played similar type of positions. So it's very possible that he was starting to look at games that maybe Carlsen's seconds had played, and he was thinking, okay, this position is a possibility. But anyways, for whatever reason, he seemed to have had this prepped, and he played c captures d4, which was the best move, and then queen d4, and then the next couple of moves all appear to be some sort of preparation. Knight c6, and then after queen c4, e5 as a very, very strong move, and again appears to be some kind of preparation. So now Magnus's moves, the moves that Magnus makes, the next couple of moves, actually force black's moves to the point where whether Hans had preparation past this point or not would be completely irrelevant. Because bishop g5, you just have nothing. You have to attack this bishop. If you get pinned, it's a knee-jerk reaction. You have to break this pin immediately. You can't let it sit there. And then rook a d1. You're not two-stepping your queen here. You're not playing queen e7, queen f6. You have to counterattack. You have to play the move bishop e6. You just don't have anything else. You have to play bishop e6 and at least force them to two-step your queen before you two-step your queen. So this move is just totally kind of forced. And then once they play rook takes queen, the sequence of exchanges is completely forced. So Hans had to play bishop takes, rook takes, bishop takes, gf. And now black has a very slight edge in this position. Because to be totally honest, this pawn on c3 is just more important than this long diagonal. Eventually, this long diagonal can probably be stopped up. Eventually, with something like f5 and e4, this long diagonal can become less of an issue or less of a thing. But this pawn on c3 is a permanent weakness that is already under wraps. We're not moving this pawn forward. The square in front of this weakened pawn is firmly blockaded, and this pawn just is not going anywhere right now. So this is just very slight edge black, but it's very slight edge black. If anything, it's easy to misassess this position and say, that this position is equal, or in a couple of moves, after a couple of mistakes, could maybe even be slight edge white. So the first thing white has to do is he has to defend his pawn on e2. This is forced. And then what else is Black going to do? He needs to put his rook on the open file before White takes it. If White takes the open file and Black doesn't contest it, then potentially White could end up being better in a couple of moves. Maybe this is some way that but I mean, Rook D8 is just so obvious. So you have to play this. So you have King E1. Preparing to contest the open file with Rook D1, and then we have Knight A5, just improving the position of the knight, trying to come in here. Also, ratcheting up the pressure on the C4 square, making sure that square is firmly blockaded. So all these moves are very, very logical. So now Rook D1. Now this is actually a pretty major decision point. I think for a lot of players, it might be actually very tempting to just exchange rooks in this position, but pretty much all of your winning chances are going to disappear once you exchange rooks. At that point, I think just maybe we safeguard this pawn somehow, maybe with e3, and then this king will come to c2, and everything will hunker down, and there's just not enough weaknesses left for Black to attack. It's possible that even a few moves down the road, even White could be better. Once he plays something like Knight h4, Knight f5, and plants this piece on a very, strong, weak square, and it could turn around. But Hans makes the correct decision. He understands that his pieces are all much better than White's right now, and they're better placed. So he takes his rook and he puts it on the open c-file, and he's attacking the pawn on c3, and this just means that at this point, Black's position is clearly better. White can't really counter by coming to the 7th. Hans can just kick him out of there, and he can do it with tempo, and he can win the pawn on c3. The rook doesn't have a home on the 7th rank, so he can't play king f8, and he can't play rook e7, and he can't play king f8. So I mean, really, this position too is not a result of Black playing particularly well. White forced Black to have this position, so all Black really had to find was maybe just this one move. He had to find rook c8, where he keeps his good rook and leaves White with this bad rook. So now after knight d2, he simply, what else is he going to do? He's going to retreat his bishop. It's attacked. And now there's pressure on this c3 pawn, and there is not a great way to defend it. There just isn't. This c3 pawn has got problems, it's got issues, and Carlsen decides to give it up for a little bit of activity and hope that he can survive that way. There was this other possibility of playing knight e4, with the idea of after the knight got kicked, he possibly had the move knight to d6, rook c3, and then gaining some counterplay against that pawn that is now on f5. This is very hard to see, and it's also very hard to understand that that's probably enough counterplay to still hold the draw. It's very weird to allow your opponent to get his rook to c3 and to allow him to possibly even take the pawn on a3 just so that you get counterplay on the f5 square. So that would have been better, but it's understandable that he missed this, so that he just plays c4. He gets this exchange to happen, and now he's got a rook and a bishop versus a rook and a knight. He's got pressure on the b7 pawn, and he's got the slightly cleaner pawn structure. So this should give him, hopefully, enough compensation to hold a draw. At this point, that's what White's fighting for. White's fighting for a draw. He's not fighting for a win. So, and again, the next couple of moves from Magnus are very forcing. Rook d8, king g7, bishop d5. These are all very forcing moves, and it forces Black to find certain replies. Rook e7, what else is he going to do? He needs to start defending his 7th rank. White was threatening to attack 2 pawns on the 7th rank. No other move than rook c. I mean, there's one candidate move in the position, and it's rook c7. So, of course, Hans played rook c7. So we have rook c7, we have rook a8, we have pawn to a6. What else? Rook back to b8. Okay, so now we have maybe one of the more creative moments in the game. Hans had to find an idea to improve his position, and what he opts for is he opts to play the move f5 followed by e4 and possibly just improving the position of his king. But what else are you going to do? Both pieces are tied down to the b7 pawn. He can't really improve his position by moving either his knight or his rook. That leaves his king, and his king cannot move on light squares. So he is forced to improve his position, and he's forced to improve his position in the most logical possible way. So he plays f5, and rook e8, the e-pawn's attacked, so he has to play e4. So you can kind of see this theme here. Carlsen is practically forcing Hans to win. Most of Hans's moves are forced. So he's not giving him much of a choice. In most of these positions, even if I were playing the game, I have one candidate move for a lot of these positions. I'll admit there's 2 or 3 moments where it's difficult and it takes a strong player to make some of these choices. But for most of the game, Magnus Carlsen continually forces Hans to play forced moves that improve his position. So we have g4, and now things are a little complicated because like there's a decision point between like here and maybe rook c5 and maybe some other things. But again, it's very forcing. There's not a ton of ways that you can hold your pawn structure together. If f takes g4, rook takes e4 is kind of a problem. So we have the only move that really works. He tries to kind of x-ray defend his pawn with tempo. And then we have bishop to a2, and then we actually have a mistake according to the computer, and a pretty large one. Hans almost gives up his whole advantage here with the move knight c4, and this is again a very natural human move, but it was apparently much better for him to simply take, and this just would have been a much better position for black. Apparently, I think it was either f takes g4, or actually I think it was rook c2 immediately was apparently a completely winning line, but he plays knight to c4, and then we have a4, and then we have this knight coming back to d6. This is a very good human-type maneuver. We're going to play this knight, and we're going to improve its position and just put it on a better square. And then we're going to have rook e7, and then I've kind of commented on this position before. It's pretty clear that Hans had in mind this idea of e3 if the knight was attacked on the last move. So if the knight was attacked with, say, rook d8, he was intending e3, which created a mate threat on the c1 square, and that's probably what prevented him from finding the move rook to c2, which is the critical move that he needs to find in this position to basically just be completely winning. Like, if you play rook c2 here, the game is over, like, on the spot. But instead, he played the move f takes g4, which is super natural. Again, it's been natural for, like, the last 3 moves to play f takes g4. So he finally plays it because he knows he can counter rook d7 with the move that he'd looked at probably last move, which is pawn to e3, which threatens mate. And that does prevent rook takes d6, because if rook takes d6, we have rook c1, rook d1, and then we're going to have, actually, even e takes f2 wins there, but we could also just have rook takes d1, king takes d1, and then e takes f2 at that point, and you actually can't stop the pawn from making a queen. So he has to play fe3, and then knight e4 threatens mate again, and that doesn't leave white with a whole lot of options to defend his position. He needs to defend the mate threat, so he just runs with his king. And then we have a follow-up that's actually kind of a weak follow-up, rook c1, and that's just a natural continuation move, but the correct move was actually rook f5, which would have held the f7 pawn and apparently been quite a bit better. So we have here, and then we have rook c2, and then this is all a bit of a mess, but it does get the job done. He simplifies a little bit more, gets his king out of the line of fire, and a bunch of stuff comes off the board in a few more moves and some tactical melees. And the ensuing endgame here is apparently completely winning for black. Black has an extra 2 pawns over here, and even after white wins these pawns over here, it's not enough to save the game. There's a little bit of counterplay here, so white can keep playing, but black managed to find the moves that were accurate enough to win the game. Basically, white can harvest this pawn, but he can't stop black from harvesting the pawn on a5, and then all white can hope for at that point is what he tried, which is you basically trap the knight, but as soon as this knight gets out, you can just resign. And with 2 extra pawns over here, it won't be long until you're in a zugzwang and the bishop has to move. So Hans just pushes his pawns, and then eventually he just attacks the bishop, and I mean, Carlsen could just resign right here. So, and he did. He just gave up. Once the bishop moves, the knight gets back into the game, and that's game over, and that's basically the end of it. So, what happened? How did a guy rated, 2861 lose to a guy rated 2688? Even all things being equal, just how does a 2861 lose to a 2688? How does this happen? This is my theory. So, we all know the rumors that have been spreading for the last couple days. We know that there's been tons and tons of rumors and allegations against Hans Niemann for cheating, and we know that a lot of this information was known before this game took place. We know that Hans had a previous record of cheating in online chess, and we know that a lot of suspicion has surrounded Hans Niemann in the past by top players. This is what I think is possible. Magnus Carlsen was aware of this. He knew that Hans Niemann had been accused of cheating in the past, and he knew that there was a possibility that Hans Niemann could even be cheating in this tournament. Or at least in his mind. That's what he thought. Even though nobody has ever proven that Hans Niemann has ever cheated in any over-the-board event, and there's zero evidence that he cheated in this game, just looking at the moves. So I think that what happened was, is Magnus Carlsen changed the way that he played chess because he thought he might be playing against a computer. And of course, this was a mistake because he ended up actually playing quite a bit worse. He put a lot of effort into getting queens off the board in the first 7 or 8 moves or whatever. Just in the first couple of moves, he wanted to get queens off the board as quickly as possible. That's why you see this cd4, queen d4. Magnus Carlsen is trying to get queens off the board. This is something that you do when you're playing against computers. You try to get the queens off the board as quickly as possible because computers don't play as well in queenless middle games. But he skipped the middle game completely. He didn't play a queenless middle game. He went all the way to the endgame. So even if you were playing against a computer, this is a bad idea. But it's especially a bad idea when you've got a young player. Like, he should have played the player and not played the player thinking that the player was cheating. Because he played right into Hans Niemann's strengths as a player, which is Hans Niemann plays the endgames extremely well, and he calculates, long tactics very poorly. He didn't give him a single long tactic to calculate. They were all short tactics, and they were extremely short. They were 2-move tactics, 3-move tactics, maybe 1-move tactics sometimes. He forced Hans Niemann to play good moves in a lot of cases. And he forced him into an endgame that Hans Niemann understood, and all he had to really understand was where to place his pieces, and that his pieces were better than Magnus's. So he basically played directly into this 2688 strengths, and he ended up losing the game because he was probably trying to play in a different style because he thought he might be playing against like Stockfish 14 or Stockfish 15, and if he'd just played chess like Magnus, he would have won the game. And even if he had been playing against Stockfish 15, if he'd played chess like Magnus, he might have won the game, or at least drawn. So, why do I think Magnus Carlsen withdrew? I think, and this is just a theory, because nobody's spoken about this, I think it's a little odd that they implemented the delay in the tournament transmission right after Magnus Carlsen withdrew. So my kind of standing theory is maybe Magnus mentioned some of his suspicions after Game 2 to the tournament directors, and maybe Magnus requested additional security measures, like additional screenings, additional like RIFs, the radio screenings for the radio signals, and also possibly requested a transmission delay. And then maybe the tournament organizers said no, he played the game anyway, he lost, and then after he lost, he said, well, you didn't do any of my demands, now I lost, and I'm done. I'm out. So maybe it was a disagreement with the tournament, with the people that were organizing the tournament. Maybe it was a disagreement with the request that he had made earlier. And again, this is just a theory, so I'm not making any statements or any accusations or any claims. This is just a theory of what might have happened, And I think that that's a very real possibility that Magnus Carlsen made some requests of the tournament organizers. Those requests were not met. And after he lost the game, that was just a breaking point for him. That was a tipping point, and he decided he didn't want to play the tournament anymore under those conditions. So, anyways, that's how I think Magnus Carlsen lost to Hans Niemann. I think, he made a very poor decision based off of, what he assumed was going on, and that decision did not work out. And that's my running theory on how this all went down. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope that you watch more of my videos, because I've got a lot of good stuff on opening preparation, endgames, etc. that will really help you with your game. Thank you very much for watching.